All right, hi everyone, welcome. I hope everyone's doing well. This is Jason Gumper from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and we are here for the April Portals community call. As usual, we do welcome your questions and feedback during today's event, so look for the questions block if you're here live, and enter anything that comes to your mind. Nick and our other special guest, Franco Musso, will be happy to take your questions and feedback. Today's focus topic is the Portal Web API. Really happy to welcome Franco back once again here. As we get started, one other note, we are recording today's event. We'll be making that on demand after the session ends. And that's about it. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to you, Nick, to get us started.
All right, well, I'll try and get through my stuff quick so that we can get to the reason that you're all here. So yeah, we got Franco back, which is super exciting. So I'll let him introduce himself when it's kind of his turn here. Quickly, my name is Nicholas Hayduk, President Software Engineer with Engineered Code here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. There's all my social channels, which hopefully, if you feel so inclined, you're gonna reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter or YouTube channel, podcast, that sort of thing. All right, moving right along here. As always, just want to express my gratitude towards Jason and the entire team at MS Dynamics World for their support of this endeavor. We're going on, what, 2.5 years of this almost, so yeah, it's great to be doing this with him and the team, and just really appreciate all their support. All right, what's the agenda? It's the same as always. We've got our portal news. We've got today's topic, which again, we're going to see some more cool web API stuff with Franco. If you didn't see his original one, the stuff that he did within a portal to make it, I guess what Spotify clone is what it was, just to make it look like nothing you'd ever seen before. It was really great work, so I'm really excited to see how he's kind of taken that to the next level with the Portal Web API that is available now. So let's try and get to that as quickly as possible. Next is Portals news, and so this is the first time in the history of the call that I've got nothing. I went through all my kind of regular places where I gather this news from, and I don't have anything new to share this month. So I don't know if anyone else has anything that you want to put in the questions area about something I may have forgotten about or missed, but like I didn't really have anything this month to share. We're kind of in the thick of, the release, the 2020 release, release 1. So I know there were some things scheduled to come out in April. I think it was either file or image support, maybe coming out in preview, but I didn't see anything kind of official come up from Microsoft. So I don't really have anything in terms of news this month. So sorry to disappoint you all on that, but hopefully that just leaves a little bit more time for Franco to kind of show us his magic. So yeah, and if you do feel, if anyone here on the call does know of something that they think is worth mentioning that's happened since the last call, please do just post that in the question and answer thing, and I'll make sure to mention it to everyone. But yeah, kind of a slower month in terms of portals news. All right, so enough from me. I'd like to again welcome back to, I think, of our first return presenter, Franco Musso, and his learnings of the web API, and kind of integrating that into all the cool stuff that he's built. So with great pleasure, Franco, do you want to, I guess if we can, Jason, if we want to switch the presenter, and we'll let Franco take it away.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Good evening, good day, good morning for wherever you are in the world. So, Portal Web API, adventures continue. So I've got some news very specific to the Portal Web API. So I guess that depends on how much people are up to speed with that. But since I last got my hands dirty, there's quite a bit that had changed. There are a few gotchas and some really good new features. And for once, I feel a bit of a VIP and an early adopter as far as these tools are concerned. So one of the tools I'm going to be showing, the Dataverse REST Builder, I've actually been in contact with Guido that built that, and he's been absolutely awesome. And we've been collaborating on getting that ready for the portal. So I'll show you my tiny little bit of input. It actually started with me writing a blog series, got a bit stuck, asked for some help in the community, and Guido reached out and showed me how to use his tool to get some of this stuff together. So in terms of what's new, or perhaps add a caveat there, what's newish. So again, depending on when was the last time you got your hands dirty with the Portal Web API. When it was first released, there was a lot of noise about that being for create, update and delete operations, but read wasn't available to us. And so we kind of had workarounds for that. So anyone already using Liquid, we know that we can already read on the server side, but there was still a bit of a gap in that we couldn't send client-side requests to read data. So we couldn't do things like retrieve records in response to user clicks, hovers, drags, whatever interactions we want, unless we force the page to refresh. So if we were doing things like clicking from a list item to open a form, if we were clicking a list item to open a custom page, but not really fast and reactive and responsive. So we couldn't do things like lazy load. We couldn't do things like drag items and change on the fly and pull the record back. So a use case that I wanted to have that on a recent project was bookmarking. So somebody viewing part of the vast database of my client's legal information, and I want to be able to bookmark something to view later. Bookmarking, the bookmark was created in near real time, but the catch is that if I then click to view my list of bookmarks, I'm subject to that usual cache refresh, and it's maybe up to 15 minutes before I can see that bookmark. It's a bit of a disjointed experience. Whereas now with the Portal Web API read, I can immediately retrieve that record, update the UI, and if someone momentarily clicks, say bookmark, then opens their list of bookmarks, it's there immediately. Also, some other things that you probably want to get in near real time. Another bit of work from out in the field that I've completed, sorry, preempting my other slides, but worked on a PayPal payment for a Microsoft partner. Previously, that was a really clunky experience. So we'd have a multi-page web form, sorry, multi-step web form. And as you might have had your hands dirty with that before, you've got to, for example, create a contact on the first step, advance to the next step. I can then select the product that I want to purchase. Moving ahead another step, I can maybe do the PayPal payment, and then I've got to trigger some things either behind the scenes or based on clicks on screen to create an event purchase, because that happens to be for event bookings. I've created an event purchase, an event registration, change statuses, and there was something like 10 clicks, 10 screens, 10 refreshes involved. Now with the Portal Web API, I can chain all those events together. So within one bit of Ajax, I've created each of those records, the retrieving the event, creating the event purchase, validating the purchase with PayPal, and actually retrieving a record to say, here's your event purchase, here's your transaction ID, here's the record that I've just created for you in Dataverse, all in one fell swoop. So definitely some cool update there with having the read operation. So now we've got the full set of create, read, update and delete with the Portal Web API, and show as many examples of that as I can on the call. We've also got some new column types. So in my previous iterations of the Spotify portal and in my Scottish Summit talk last year, we had access to image columns in Dataverse. We had access to file columns in Dataverse. They were newly created, but we had no access to those with the portal. So for any multimedia, everything I've been able to show in the past had been using note attachments. Not great, because note attachments aren't the quickest. They're not particularly optimized for using images. So we've got the image column type that uses Azure Blob Storage, and we can retrieve that using the Portal Web API and bypass notes altogether. So I put a few blog posts together that I'll link to about how you can make use of any of that stuff. We've got some updates to the Portal Management app. You might have noticed there's a new entity in there now called Column Permissions. So the security previously was based on web roles and table permissions. So based on the web role, you've got, for example, authenticated user. You might get table level access to things like you're allowed to see contact, you're allowed to see account. We give you privileges such as read, write, append to. And then the only way we could get more specific, so for example, determining which fields those people can access, was with editing site settings. But we've now got a separate entity called column permissions. And you see that's in addition to the table permissions. So I believe that's going to have a wider application, but at present that is specific to working with the Portal Web API. And it's much like when we previously had the site settings to say what we can do with each entity. So for example here, I would just create a site setting, enter either a common separated list of fields or an asterisk for everything, whereas now we've got some UI table to be able to go in and say, create a new column permission, very similar to creating a table permission. What's the name, which tables does it relate to, which website is that for, and then which web roles do I want to associate that with. Now going back a little bit, I think it was a few months on my last project, but actually caught me out just tonight, that I was experiencing issues setting lookup fields using the Portal Web API. And this was, say, a change I believe I went in a few months ago, and it seemed to change the syntax that was expected when we set lookup fields. But just in case anyone else has experienced that, I'll show you what it is that I'm talking about. Show you the symptom first. So in my example, we're looking at an editable grid here, but it could be anything at all, anything using the web API and a lookup field. So what I found was, whatever the update was, whether I was changing the artist or something else, I'd get this internal server error, and let's just check over to other area. Yeah, so we'll get this, an unexpected error occurred while processing the request. I've got an inner error login enabled, but it doesn't give me any clue as to what the issue is there. So managed to work out that's what it related to. So it's when we're going to set a lookup field and we're referring to the schema name for that table, we need a / ahead of that. So that, as I say, seems to have been a change in the last couple of months, which you might not pick up on unless you've got, or you might not even encounter unless you've got an older portal. Once you update that, your code no longer works. But that's the difference. You pop a / in before the schema name in any of the lookup fields it's trying to set. And then you should find that solves the issue. No, in fact, sorry, I've lined myself up to get a different error, but at least we're progressing. So I've got too long a description for what that field allows. Make a different change, perhaps changing the status reason. Oh, well, the demo god's clearly on my side. Anyway, that's what to look out for with the lookup issue. Apologies for that. Okay, so as I mentioned, out in the field, what have I been working on in terms of the Portal Web API? So the two aspects, things that I never touched before. One was the PayPal payments, and one was virus scanning. And all of this was about reducing the number of clicks, but providing the same experience. So we had an existing method that worked. So we'd used Power Automate at the back end before. We'd used plugins before. We'd had multi-step web forms. So why we're using the Portal Web API? It's the ability to do all of this with Ajax and without refreshes. Without refreshes, without form submits, and just making a much more streamlined user experience. So condensed the experience into single clicks, single page experiences that previously took multiple web form steps, and allows us to break free from that portal cache. So remember, the ability to read with the Portal Web API opens a lot of that up. So in one click, for example, check whether there's still availability on the course or has it reached capacity since the user opened the page. Make that purchase with PayPal. If that's successful, create a payment record. If that's successful, create an event attendee record. So how do we make any of this happen? There's some prerequisite skills. So I mentioned Ajax already. We're able to have a show of hands. Can we see who's already familiar with Ajax and with the Portal Web API, just to not risk going over old ground?
Yeah, just have to, I think, maybe if people want to post in the questions if they have experience with that sort of thing. Maybe not a bad idea to just cover it.
I do see a hand going up too. People are using the hand raising.
Okay, yeah. So it seems some people have experience
there, yeah.
Others don't. Okay, well, what Ajax allows us to do, touched on it briefly, is go and retrieve some information without a page refresh. So retrieve is one example. We could also send some information to the database without a refresh. And we can update properties. So for example, if I was to, using only liquid, I'm limited to the fact that that page is now loaded. I can't do anything else in terms of writing to the database unless I had a form on here. I couldn't do pull in any further information, retrieve any extra records, update any values without, again, that page refresh. So an example might be the like button. So I want to send a request to the database to create a like record. I don't want to have to refresh the page. I don't want to move the user away. They might want to continue on listening to this album. So I'll show you the web template in just a moment. The idea is what we're asking the Portal Web API to do is pull in some details such as that GUID of the track, the GUID of the user, the names of the user in the track. Go ahead and create a like record. So let's see how that's set up. Just a moment while I find the record. So you may have noticed there are a few clues I left myself on the page there. So these data attributes are going to be very important when we're dealing with the Portal Web API. We need to be able to access the elements on the page and their schema names, so things like GUIDs, option set values, names, and the record type, etc. And as a bit of an aside, I'll show you how to use jQuery selectors and CSS selectors to access those properties. So on that template, as I'm building it out, as I'm building the UIs, writing out that button, that table, for example, I'm starting to put some data attributes in place. So you'll see that things like retrieving the name, leaving it as an attribute behind the button to get the GUID of that album, to get the name of that album, to get the record type. So that when I receive that click, so one of the first skills that we need in this is to actually listen out for an event. So that will usually be a click, but equally it could be something like based on a timer, it could be based on a hover, it could be based on drag, perhaps if you're using jQuery UI draggable. So we need an on-click event. So here we are in this example that I've got an on-click event on my like button. So there's a very simple selector. So looking for an anchor tag that's got an ID of like button. So I've given myself a clue, something to do a contact with. So if anyone clicks on that button, run some Ajax. So in fact, that's an older bit of Ajax. This is one where we're using the web API. So I'm building a data object, piecing that together. So these are the fields that I want to write to in the web API. And there are some quirks, as you're probably used to, with the various different Dataverse column types. So first of all, I'm setting a text field. Text is nice and easy. So I can just concatenate information together. There I'm using some liquid to get the first name of the user and saying that they've liked whatever the album's called via the web API. So the only thing really to be careful with text is to escape that in case there's any special characters. Next, I'm setting a lookup field called my prefix and album. So you see there's a bit of a strange format for this. So we need @odata.bind, then the schema name of the table, and in brackets a GUID. So as it happens, I'm getting that GUID dynamically, but it could be hard coded to make that example look more straightforward. I'm doing much the same thing with this customer field. So I'm setting the customer lookup field to a value on the contacts table, and I'm using liquid there, as you can see, to get the ID of the logged in user. So here's an example of Ajax. So we're choosing what's the type of operation we want to complete. So we've got operations that relate to create, update, delete, associate, disassociate. So if you're wondering where you get any of that information from, I'd previously written that from scratch until I got to know this awesome tool that Guido put together. So we've got the Dataverse REST builder. This will actually write our Ajax for us. So all that I would need to do if I was to write that template again was to use Guido's visual tool and then wrap it within whatever event listener I want. So if I'm saying I want that to happen on click, on drag, on timer, etc. So I'm going to create a new collection. I've got a new request, so this is going to be creating a like. So Guido's done an awesome job of simplifying this. So what's the type of request that we want? I want to create a record. Which table do I want? It's on the like table. And then that goes and gathers all the metadata for that particular table, and I can choose which columns I want to write. So let's say I want to write the name. Perhaps just pop a placeholder in there. I want to know which user it was. And again, I'm just going to select a placeholder. So I've got a visual way of doing this. I don't have to type in the GUID. I can search by the primary column. So for that, it's going to be the full name of the user. So here's one, Franco Musso. And finally the track. Oh, sorry, the album. So I've then got access to that Ajax, in various different formats. So it's not just necessarily for the portal in this example. I can use the Dataverse web API. I can use fetch. I can use jQuery. Various different means, but here's the version that is usable on the portal. So the first thing it does is builds that data object for us. So here are all the fields that we want to set with the values we've chosen to set. So these are the hard-coded versions in this example. But then here's the Ajax that we want. So that's going to go ahead post a record to the database to that particular table, the must-find likes table, using the data that we've got here. And then we've got some placeholders there for what will happen if that's successful, what will happen if that errors. So I put a post together a while ago that I've linked to in the slides, which is how to provide some visual feedback. So unless we design around it, nothing will actually happen on screen when we perform an operation with the Portal Web API. So the database will update it in near real time, but there's nothing actually to tell the user something has happened. So quickly walk you through that. But some examples of what we might want to do based on projects that I've completed before. Sometimes we might want to show and hide areas of the screen. So perhaps we've got a notification with Bootstrap, we've got a specific div that we want to show, we've got an error message. Those things we can show and hide on success. Also, we might want to change the value of a particular piece of text, or sorry, a particular element. So perhaps if I was to remove one of these liked songs, what might be useful is to show when I click that it is being deleted, and when it's actually happened, take that row out of the table. So those are each things that I've set to run upon success. If I delete that like, first of all, I've got some momentary text, so I've changed the element of that icon, swapping it out for the word deleting, and you saw once that had actually succeeded, I removed the row from the table as a visual indicator. So I've got quite a few examples on this page. As I say, it's linked to in the slides. So one is when you click the like button, I've got the moment that that Ajax call starts, that we've got a momentary change. So from like to saving, and once it's succeeded, a tick, so the user's not going to click that button again. And probably something else useful to do there would be to disable that button, disable that anchor on success. Another example being with my image upload. Again, I'll link to the blog post that shows you how to upload images to the Portal Web API, but you know, the useful bit of feedback there, besides just guessing that it might have happened behind the scenes, is to show the user it has succeeded, and here is that image. So what we've done for that one is on success, we then retrieve that image column, and we set the source of the image to that newly retrieved record. With the editable grid, when that was working before I broke it this afternoon, upon clicking Save Changes, we got a status column to show that that particular change is being processed. And then once it is processed, once we've got a success, see I append a check mark to that. But that's entirely up to you what you choose to provide feedback. I say it could be maybe a Bootstrap notification, it could be adding a class, it could be changing some CSS, it could be appending a row to the table, whatever you see fit, whatever you think makes the most sense for your scenario. So a prerequisite for doing any of this really is to be able to select elements of the page. So whether that is the like button to change its contents, if that is a particular image to change its source, if that is a row within a table, really key to what we're trying to do. So for example, if I want to select one of these rows and hide it using jQuery, what I would do usually start in the inspector. I'm not an expert on HTML, jQuery. It's useful to see what's there behind the scenes. So I built this looking for a particular table row. So one row of data in the database, one liked tracking this example with one table row. So I can then say, for example, that I want to select a table row. So I've got the starting point. I can see there are 7 table rows. It's not giving me anything specific just yet. So again, I could take a look to see what clues have I left myself behind the scenes. I've given myself the GUID. So a very useful selector to be able to pinpoint is these data attributes. So the basics that you've probably seen many times before are being able to select an item by its class or by its ID. But here we want to get very specific and retrieve particular rows, or maybe even particular values about those rows. So for example, here I might want to get that text, wish you well, or I might want to get specifically the value of the date. So what I can do for that is say, I want to get the table row, and then this is the syntax for actually getting a specific data attribute. So I put in the name of that attribute equals, and then in double quotes, what I'm interested in. So in this example, that particular GUID. So now I go from getting 7 table rows, so all the table rows, to specifically this one. And then I can perhaps loop through that to say, well, I want to, now with that row selected, I want to look through it to get this particular image. I want to loop through it to say, for example, get me the created on attribute from, sorry, get me the table cell that has got the attribute of created on and pull me back that date or the duration, for example. So being able to select elements of the page really helps. As I say, we can do various things with that. So it could append content onto it, we can show it, we can hide it, and we can do simple animations maybe. Let's get rid of that one. So up to you completely, but what you think is the most relevant way to provide that feedback on screen. But some simple examples being that changing the content. So if I was to click on that button and say I want to get the value of that, I want to get the HTML content and replace it with something else. Let's see how that's done in the web template. So on success, I'm replacing that. So I've got, I'll give myself a clue again. So as part of the button click, I'm sending this, so the jQuery this object, so in other words, the button that's been clicked, and I'm saying I want to replace the HTML of that with this bootstrap icon. That makes sense. So just having a quick look through the question. So yes, good point there that the language is important as well. So yeah, something like unliking a song, for example, deleting might not be the best example. Perhaps the text of unliking, yes, would make a lot more sense. So other considerations we've got are the field types. I think we'll post on that as well. A really useful one from Microsoft is performing operations with the Portal Web API, and that'll give you various examples for what do we need to consider for formats, for example, for a date only field, a date time, a lookup, if we're setting a choice value, sorry, option set value in old school money. And if we jump to the editable grid example, then probably worth just showing you what I'd considered for putting this into place. I know it's an example a lot of people use, an editable grid, but again, thinking about giving myself the clues, leaving myself the clues to be able to select those values, to set those values. So what I've done, as I'm building the HTML, I'm using Liquid to provide the existing values. So for things like a text field, very straightforward. But I put myself in there, what's the name of the field that I'm interested in order to update that, and what's the current value. So in the previous example, we showed, we essentially had one version of each field. So one version of the name field on something like the album page. We've got one version of the name, we've got one version of the duration, we've got one instance of each of the field types. With the editable grid, it's a bit more complicated. So what I've done is included the GUID in each of these fields. So the reason being that I can easily then pinpoint that I want to get the name specifically for that record, or I want to get the duration specifically for that record. So that's where another type of selector comes in handy. So for example, I can say I want to get, if I was to get all of the names from that table, I can use a selector to say get all of the inputs that have got an ID that begin with Mustaine name or begin with Mustaine main artist, rather than having to know what the GUID is specifically. So if it begins with, what we can do is just copy that. I can say I want to get those that have got an ID. That's the syntax for begins with. So where ID begins with Mustaine name, for example. So then I don't need to know the GUID. So where that might be helpful is to say I can look for all the fields that have changed. Sorry, all the rows that have changed. For each of those rows, then go and get the attribute that has got an ID beginning with Mustaine name. Just makes my life a little bit easier. So thinking through that logically, what I'd probably be looking to do and say is find out which fields have changed. And I'll show you the trick for doing that in just a moment if you've not seen it behind the scenes already. But then say, right, look through each of those rows, pull out that particular attribute or any of those that, that are dirty. So behind the scenes on basic forms and entity forms, you might have seen before, there's a class, called dirty, and that's in the onChange event for each field. So if I was to change any of these fields, change any of their values, you'll see there's some visual feedback there. So it's some feedback to the user, but also for me in jQuery to be able to highlight those particular rows. So what I'm looking out for is that they've got a class of dirty. So in something like an editable grid situation where you're not wanting to update every single record just in case it might have changed, you want to get only those that we're confident have changed. That's where is dirty comes into play. So I've got an event listener that says, when these change, set the class of dirty. And then when I loop through those, I'll be saying, get any of the rows that contain an element that has got a class of dirty. So the event is on this button. On click of save changes, loop through any rows that have got elements that have got a class of dirty, write those back to the database. So I'll show you that template quickly. Okay, so first thing is providing some output. So this again differs on the type of information we're trying to capture. So if we imagine, for example, we want a drop down, we want a HTML select, we need to be providing some attributes in that to show the selection. For anyone not familiar with that, we've got the select, and the selected option needs to have this attribute of selected. So that's something that as I'm looping through those options, so I've got a fetch XML query to look through all those artist records, and I'm checking that to say if this is the one that is already selected for this record, add that attribute of selected. Also considering things like rounding, so behind the scenes, my duration field's got more than 2 decimal places. I'm using the round filter to take care of that. The checkboxes, similar thing to with select, where there's a particular attribute I need to care about. So I would be looking to say for that checkbox, has it got the attribute of checked equals checked? And just glancing over the questions, yeah, so some very very useful stuff in there. So besides the fact that this is client side, I am simplifying things somewhat. Absolutely, that's a fair point. But again, this is from a point of view of people that aren't necessarily programmers and code first, which I'm certainly not. Dates, we need to keep in mind that that's the format that we're going to be able to write a date back to Dataverse using the Portal Web API. So as well as potentially showing a user-friendly date on the front end, we need a way to have ready access to that database value as well. So within the liquid there, I'm using the date filter to pop that into a 4-character year, 2-character month, 2-character day. Likewise, when it comes to status reasons, writing those back to the Portal Web API, sorry, to Dataverse with the Portal Web API, an option set label is going to be no use to us. So behind the scenes, I need to make sure that I've got the option set value. I'll show you where that is. Give myself all the possible clues. So first of all, schema name, which record to update, what's the value that I'm writing back, compared to what's a label that I'm showing on the front end, and then add the if statement to say which one to show this selected attribute on. So that controlling this, whether it's showing as draft or published, and then the numeric value for writing back to the database. There's the listener that I mentioned. So I'm saying for any of those inputs, selects, text areas, unchange, set is dirty. But there's also the option for clearing is dirty. Lots of this might look familiar if you've dug behind the scenes with basic forms or entity forms. Sorry, basic forms or advanced forms. I've basically pieced this together using clues from that. So things like having the ID of the record, things like having the data name, things like having the option set value behind the scenes. See, in fact, I've got time to show you a quick record, a document that I put together about the helpers that exist behind the scenes. Appreciate I've not done very well for time this session. Apologies for that. I was feeling very well prepared until I noticed that my portal that I'd resurrected after a few months, as you noticed there, had broken with the web API changes. So apologies. But here are a few considerations and things that I've put in place for that editable grid template in case any use. So when we're clicking that save button, the JavaScript has got a couple of things we need to achieve. So first of all, we need to get rows that contain fields that have changed. So we mentioned that was using the isDirty function to set the class called dirty. We then loop through each row and we want to trigger the logic. We're then providing some visual feedback. We're preparing the data to write back to each field. So there are some gotchas. We need to make sure, for example, that we're setting at least nulls for mandatory fields. We can't just send nothing. We need to put the function together in Ajax to update that record using the Portal Web API. Optional, but very much recommended, and provide some visual feedback when it's successfully updated, and then remove that dirty class once we've processed that record. So we needed a selector that will give us all the items in the grid that have the dirty class. So that was as simple as this, to say anything within the editable grid, get any table cells that have got the dirty class. So far that would give us various different fields. For just jump back on screen to that, so that will give us these three fields, this field. But what we want is a row as opposed to a collection of different cells. So what I've done for that is use this selector. So right, you've got that, you've got the cells that are dirty. Now look up the hierarchy to get the closest table row. So get the row that has changed, the record that we want to update. So once you've got a dirty field, look up the hierarchy to get the closest row. And then we need to loop through that row. We need to search within that row. So we're running a function on each of those, and we're saying what we're doing within that. So when we click the button, I've got that in an event listener now. When we click this Save Editable Grid button, these are the steps to complete. So get that table row, and then we're searching within that to say, where's this attribute called change status? So there's a table cell that I left blank to provide some visual feedback. So here we are. So that table cell in each row has got an attribute of change status, and that's where I can add in some information like processing, like updated, like an error was encountered. So in that example, changing it to processing. So this, by the way, is referring to what has been clicked. Very useful bit of jQuery. Then we're preparing the data to be written to each field. As I mentioned, that changes depending on the field type. So Dataverse REST builder gives a really good starting point, but that was based on my hard-coded value. And now I need to do things like use if statements to cater for whatever value hasn't been provided, and to do any transformations between what I've got on screen and what the API is expecting. But this is a really good heads up as to what to provide for that. And in fact, another thing to show from there is you can actually run that. So if I move to the code editor, I can execute that code. So before taking the effort to make it dynamic, I can see whether it actually works. So maybe that was going to tell me that, well, no, there's a business rule, entity level business rule on that particular table that's going to block that, or maybe I'm missing some mandatory fields or something like that. Something else that's useful with that is specifying whether you want to return the record. So if I want to have access to the GUID when that's created, I've got the option to do that. So there's some examples. I'll share this on the blog once I've had a chance to run through it and the latest version of the portal. Obviously, no point sharing it with you while it's still providing errors. But examples of how to use each of the selectors, how to prepare each of the field types, whether that's a decimal number, a date field, a text field, a lookup, a yes, no, multiple lines of text, lookup, for example. So we do the prep, then all of that goes into an Ajax call, as we saw, and so just quickly find that the page from Microsoft that I mentioned regarding performing Dataverse Web API operations. In fact, sorry, that's the Dataverse one as opposed to the Portal Web API. Yep. Really useful examples in there for all the various data types, and that'll take you through as well in which scenarios would you use post, would you use put, would you use read, would you use delete. So I'll put that in the slides as well and share that with everybody. So thanks very much for your time. I apologise that ended up as a bit of a car crash in a wild goose chase. It is, so apologies, because I actually managed to break the Portal Web API on my not used for a long time portal.
All right.
Yeah, no apologies required. I mean, that was awesome. It's great to see, see real world examples of how this stuff can be used. And the big thing that I kind of try and explain to people when we go through this type of thing is a lot of this, yes, you got the portal's web API, but it's like it's jQuery. Like a lot of it has to do with kind of some of the maybe a little old school kind of jQuery stuff, and you know, the portal's still kind of dependent on that. So that's something that you know, the newer way of doing those things is with React and that sort of thing. But in the portal for something like this, you know, that overhead may not be worthwhile. So yeah, we still do a ton of stuff that's just kind of more kind of old school jQuery stuff. So it's really great that you were able to share some of that as well.
Cool, thank you. Now that's in preparation for a session that I'm running at Scottish Summit in June. So if anyone's lucky enough to get access to that event, either in person or online, do please check us out. And I promise we'll have those teething issues ironed out well in advance of that. Great.
Well, Franco, thanks so much for presenting today. That was great. It's always great to have kind of more of a technical conversation. Sometimes, you know, my sessions are a little bit more high level. So it's really great to have a guest on that wants to get into the weeds of, you know, using the API. Even the little things like, oh, look, you know, this setting a lookup, that's changed a little bit. Those are things that can drive you crazy for hours if you don't know where to look. So great tricks there as well. So we're a few minutes over here, so just trying to wrap this up as quickly as possible. The next call will be May 19th. Look forward to having you there. Jason, any other parting words?
No, we'll be following up with an email to all of you with information about that next event and maybe information on the resources you saw today. Thanks very much, Franco. Really appreciate you sharing.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Very much appreciated.
All right, and I guess we will end it there. Thanks to you, Nick, as well.
Everyone.
All right, bye, everyone.
Have a great rest of everyone's day. Bye.
Thanks.